Welcome to the Quick Start Guide for Lumenzia. Hey guys, this is Greg Benz, the developer of Lumenzia, and I want to first start by simply saying thank you for your purchase of Lumenzia. It really truly means the world to me, and I'm so excited to bring you into the community. We've got an amazing group of thousands of photographers using Lumenzia, and the engagement over the years has just been incredible. So encourage you to not only engage with the software, but with other Lumenzia users through the various user groups that you'll see linked from the Lumenzia user guide. And the first place I want to start actually is just pointing you to the files that came in the zip download. When you download Lumenzia and extract the files, you'll see several things. Of course, there is the how to install video. So if you haven't installed yet, make sure you check out those, as well as the how to install document. That contains all the information you'll need to actually get Lumenzia into your copy of Photoshop. But in addition to it, there's several other important documents right in the root of this file. There's, of course, the terms of the license. There is the user guide for the basics panel that comes with Lumenzia. There is the actual Lumenzia user guide. This is by far the most important and usually most overlooked document that comes with Lumenzia. It's a full-fledged 30-plus page description of everything in Lumenzia. Contains all sorts of great information. It's broken down into chapters with a table of contents, also including a suggested learning plan for new users, and links to all the videos are available strewn throughout the document. So as you go to various sections in the document, you can find the related video. So it's just a great way to navigate all the support for Lumenzia. There's also a button reference, and this is just an overview of all the modifier keys, how they work on the different buttons in Lumenzia. Very helpful for any power users, but also very helpful for anyone using CS6, because you don't have buttons for all the functions that are available in CC, and so modifier keys are going to be very important for you if you're on CS6. And then lastly, the Lumenzia actions, which are new in version 5. This just describes how to use them. They're a supplementary way to allow you to use some of the light and dark masks and selections as a part of your own actions, because Lumenzia itself is not recordable. So let's jump into Photoshop here. I assume at this point you've already installed Lumenzia, and you just simply go up to Window, Extensions, and then you would want to click on Basics to open up the Lumenzia Basics panel. Go back to Window, Extensions, click on Lumenzia. That will open up the Lumenzia panel, the main panel. And just like any other panel in Photoshop, you can double click the titles to minimize them. You can click and drag to pop them out into free space. You can rearrange them. These little blue coloring show you where it's going to be dropped when I let go. I can put it in the middle here. I can click and drag the edges to resize the panels. I can drop it into these little, thin sidebars so I can have Lumenzia pop out. You can put it pretty much anywhere you want. So it just gives you a lot of flexibility with the interface. So encourage you to find the way that works best for you. Personally, the way I show it on screen is the way that I like to work, where Lumenzia is always available at the top right. And then if I need more space below, I just double click the tab to hide it temporarily. Other folks really like the idea of putting it with these little minimize side columns where you can pop it out anytime you need to see it and then otherwise minimize it. So it really depends on kind of the size of your screen and how you like to work, but a lot of ways you can set up the panel itself. Don't let the number of buttons in Lumenzia intimidate you. They're actually organized around 3 core principles, and those are preview, apply, and refine within the panel. So the preview buttons are designed to help you preview a luminosity mask or selection before you create it so that you can pick the right one. The apply buttons are designed to take that preview and then do something meaningful with it to turn it into a luminosity mask or selection, and there are a number of different layer types you can apply it to within this section. Then we have refine, because luminosity masks are usually not perfect coming out of the gates. You usually have to do something to tweak them, maybe target them to certain parts of the image or to certain colors in the image. So refine is going to allow you to further improve your luminosity mask or selection. Lastly, we have a few other buttons at the very bottom of the panel. There's the pre-blend button, which is designed to help prepare the document for manual blending of multiple exposures. And then these red buttons, which are all about visualizing your image. They're not really intended to do anything to your image for you. They're designed to help you see your image in a different way so that you can either work more precisely on areas that might be very hard to see, or to work more quickly. But either way, they're just designed to help you look at your document in a different way so you can get the most out of the rest of the options up above. So let's go through an example of this, and we'll go through just a quick example, and then we'll get a little bit deeper. So I want to just progressively build the knowledge and understanding here. So in this image, let's say that this top left part of the image, where I've already brightened it up a bit, let's say we wanted to actually go the opposite direction. Let's say that we want to darken this down to restore more color to the top left part of the sky. So let me show you rapid fire how we'd make this adjustment, and then I'll come back and walk through the steps in much more detail. The first thing I'd want to do is find a preview that accurately targets those bright areas, but doesn't have too much spillover selection of other areas. Lights 3 is targeting the right areas because white reveals and black conceals in a layer mask. So I have a nice selection of the sky with minimal selection of these adjacent areas. So this is a good preview. Let's use it. We need to apply it, and a brightness contrast layer is a great way to adjust, of course, brightness, which is what we want to do. We want to bring down the brightness of the sky. So when I click this, our preview is converted into a layer mask on a brightness contrast layer. It's labeled for us so we know which one we used. We can just simply double click it now and begin to bring down our brightness. Notice that it's not adjusting the whole image, just the areas we selected in our mask. And I'll bring up the contrast just to keep a little bit more detail in those clouds, but we've gone from before to after, adding some nice color to the sky. But also notice in the waves here that we've made adjustments to the waves, and I don't like that. I don't want to dull the detail in the waves, but if we look at our layer mask, they were also selected because, of course, the white caps in the waves are very, very bright. So we want to now refine this, and we can do that with a group mask. We put a mask on a mask, and now it's the combination of these that will reveal things. So right now we have our adjustment inside this group, and that group has a layer mask revealing everything. But if we begin to black out parts of this group, they won't be revealed in the image. So I'm going to click B for my paintbrush. I've got black paint, and now I can paint over these wave areas, and you can see from before to after, just hitting Command Z here, that we have removed the adjustment from this area because we didn't want it to be in that image. And so now we've kind of gone from here to here with those couple quick steps. So what did we do? We created a preview of a mask to help us find that Lights 3 was the best starting point. We then applied it to the most appropriate adjustment. In this case, a brightness contrast was going to allow us to change the brightness of the image. And then it wasn't a perfect mask, so we used group to refine it. That's the general workflow of preview, apply, and refine. Let's now take a look at the preview, apply, and refine sections in greater detail to understand how they work and our alternative options within each section. Up top in preview, the bulk of the buttons fall on this gradient background, which is going to give us our basic luminosity masks. Click on any of them for a preview, such as Darks 2, and you see you get a preview, and you can click through different options to explore the right luminosity mask for your image. Generally speaking, looking for something that is white on the object you want to adjust and relatively dark or black on everything else is what you want in your luminosity mask or selection. Now, in order to find the right starting point, they're organized logically from darks on the left-hand side, which you see with the black background, over towards midtones in the middle, and then lights on the right, as shown by the lighter background behind them. As well as moving from top to bottom, you go from more general, such as lights, down to more specific, such as Lights 3. So as you move from top to bottom, you're generally getting more specific selections of whatever it is you're after, with the exception of the M through M6, which are essentially everything left over when you subtract out the light and dark values. But you can see by the width of the buttons, the general suggestion that M6 is selecting more range of tones than the M is. So the general coverage of the button is meant to indicate, roughly speaking, which tones are selected. You know, whether DM1 is a little bit brighter dark midtones than DM2 because it's a little bit to the right. So it's not a perfect selection of things, but it gives you a very good representation of where things are so you can find the right starting point. Now, these previews are not just a preview, but they are customizable. For example, if I click on zone 7, we can then go in and further tweak this by playing with these different layers here. When we have a preview, we get these temporary orange layers that create our preview. We can turn it off to see the underlying image if we want to, but we can also adjust it. So we could be more or less selective to various colors in the image if we want to. We could go and tweak the levels adjustment to get more strong selection of the key tones we're picking and maybe reject more of the adjacent areas. It's a very deep subject. There's a separate video on how to customize your masks, but I just want you to know at this point that these orange preview layers are not just giving you a preview, they're also giving you a very powerful capability to go in and tweak your luminosity masks however you want to get really the exact mask that you need. It's something that I use on nearly all my masks and highly encourage you to check out that video. So that's the main block here. We've got these zones underneath the DML buttons, and the A through E is a 5-zone wider zone system, and 0 through 10 is a more specific 11-zone system. So for example, zone C is going to select midtones and a pretty generous amount of adjacent midtones around the center. For example, zone 5, conversely, is more specifically picking the middle tones and less of zones 4 or 6 around it. So just the specificity of these as indicated by the width of the buttons. Now, if you're not sure what you need to pick from your image, if we're looking at an image like this and we want to know what zone this is in, well, we could go and click and figure out if it's closer to zone B or zone C. Well, it's definitely zone C. Or alternatively, we could click on these zone pickers to find out where it is. So let's click on this narrow zone picker. And what we do is get this prompt to pick a color from the image. So I can sample this color here, hit OK, and now I've got a narrow zone mask created from it because the narrow zone picker is aligned with the row of narrow zones, and the wide zone picker on top is aligned with a row of wide zones. We can see that it picked zone 5 as indicated in the preview here as the nearest zone. Now these previews are actually a little bit more precise. If we look at the curve here, and this may not make sense yet until you've watched the video on customizing, but the center of the zone we picked is right here. The actual zone 5 is a little bit to the left. And my point is that when we use the zone pickers, you are getting a more precise targeting of a specific tone in the image. So if you really want to be precise, start with the zone pickers. That's probably the best way to pick the zone you want. Now with the zone pickers, you're picking a specific zone, such as zone 4, zone 6, etc. Sometimes you actually want a broader range of tones. Let's say, for example, these waves, rather than just picking the brightest part or some middle value, maybe you simply want to just select the full range of values. That's where you'd want to pick with the range picker. When I click on that, I'm prompted to create 2 samples instead of 1, and everything in between will be selected. So I can go click on the brightest parts. If you click and drag around, you'll quickly find the brightest, hit OK, and then we can click and drag around and find a darker part of that wave, click OK, and we now have a selection of that wave area, which is based on a sample of 2 points with some feathering on either side. So the zone pickers are centered around 1 value. The range picker is going to pick everything between 2 sampled points. And then lastly, we have a couple of specialty options. We have the vibrance and saturation masks. Saturation will go and create a map of the most saturated things in the image. Obviously, the most colorful things in the image oftentimes includes some shadow areas as well. The purpose of a mask like this is usually in order to find things that are oversaturated and out of gamut and bring them back in so that they're printable without affecting other colors in the image. We also have the vibrance mask, which is essentially the inverse. And usually where a vibrance mask would be used would be in applying it to an HSL layer, which then converts it from a set of color-specific saturation sliders to essentially a bunch of color-specific vibrance sliders, because there is no yellow or blue vibrance slider in Photoshop, but by applying a vibrance mask to HSL, you get that kind of control. Check out the video on saturation mask to learn more about that. Then we have the difference, which is totally unique. Unlike any other mask in Lumenzia or just general luminosity masking, it's not based on a specific pixel, it's based on the pixels around it. So when I click on lighter, what I'm going to get is a map of everything that's lighter than its neighbor. So for example, the interface of the sky and the land is lighting up here because the sky is brighter than the adjacent pixels. And this is not an image where I would use this option, but the difference mask can be great when you have light shining on an image as shown in the specific demo I have for the difference button. I would check that out. Many of my Lumenzia users have also told me that they love using it for sharpening. So it has a lot of creative usages when you're trying to compare the brightness of a pixel to something around it. Let's clear that out. Now within the apply select section here, we have a bunch of different adjustment layers up top with these icons. And that's the most common way you might apply a luminosity mask directly. For example, I could select lights 3 and then apply it as an HSL adjustment by clicking on HSL. And now we have an HSL layer with this mask on it, the lights 3 mask. And it's an unadjusted layer, so we can begin tweaking it and make whatever adjustments we want to make to that particular part of the image. All of these buttons that are orange here are designed to accept the orange preview layers as an input. So it's letting you know that all of these are going to create a luminosity mask when you have a preview from up above. So those were the adjustment layers, but that's just 7 different adjustment layers, or if you're in the CS6 panel, just 5 different options. If you want to apply a mask to any layer, a different layer, such as, let's say, a black and white layer, or maybe you've got a layer from Nik Color Effects, or whatever it is, it could be my underlying pixel layer, you can create your preview. Let's go pick midtones too. And then you can click on the mask button. And what the mask button is going to do is going to take that preview and apply it to whatever layer is active. So that's how you could apply a preview to any layer, as opposed to these adjustment layers are just giving you quick access to those specific adjustment layers. Then we have 4 different specialty types of layers. Contrast is going to draw out contrast in the image, but it's going to do so based on the luminosity masker selection you provide as an input. See the demo on the contrast button to learn more about that. Dodge will give you a dodge and burn layer. Check out the tutorials on that. That's a very deep subject. Vignette will of course give you a vignette. There's a tutorial on that. And sharp will give you options for 3 different types of sharpening, and there's of course tutorials on that. So everything we've done so far has used a luminosity mask as it is, but there are many times when you only want to use part of a luminosity mask and you'd like to do so in a natural way, which is why you can use lasso selections or paths to isolate part of your mask. So for example, let's go and create a new preview. Let's say we want to work on this top left part of the image. If I click on lights 3, I have a nice selection of that part of the image, but I have this extraneous selection of the waves and some other background stuff here that I probably don't want to include. I could go ahead and apply this as a mask and then fix the mask later, or I can address it right now. If I use a lasso selection, I can then quickly draw a lasso around the area that I want to work with. And now when I go and apply this to, let's say, maybe a color balance this time, click on that. Notice we get this option asking us what we want to do with that lasso selection. We can feather it, giving us a nice soft transition. We could keep a hard edge, or we could just ignore it. And then within this, we can also choose whether we want to create this as a separate mask or not. So I'm going to choose that option, and I'm going to choose to feather. And what we're going to get is this mask the mask scenario. So we got the lights 3 here in totality, but then we got this additional mask here, which was created from that selection with a nice feathered edge. And if we double click on this mask, you can see it has a feather built into the mask. So we can tweak the amount of feathering. So we can go back to a hard edge, or we can give it a softer edge, whatever we want. But we now have this combined mask that allows us to, let's say, go and start to tweak the color. And let's go and just do something pretty strong here. And notice that it's only being applied up top left here. It's not being applied to the waves because our selection that's rendered in this mask has directed things to just the relevant part of this mask. Let's go ahead, delete that, and I'll show you another way you can work with things. If we were to go and take a look at that same area, let's say you prefer working with paths instead of selections. Well, now we can go and just kind of quickly create whatever selection we need using paths. And this path will be treated just like a selection. So when we go to apply it, we're asked what we want to do with it. I'm going to feather it again. And now we see that we have the same result here, but we used a path tool as an input instead of a selection. So that's a very handy way to target things when you want to use just part of a luminosity mask. And this sort of scenario here where you want to transition over an edge or use some extraneous thing here, very common scenario where I would recommend using that, but you can use some of the other tools if you want alternatively. Let's go ahead and get rid of this. Now, lastly is the selection button or cell, which is a very advanced option. There's a lot of things that it can do. If I click on, say, Zone 10, I get this preview. I can then click on Cell, and it's converted it into a Zone 10 selection, which we can see by the marching ants over here, as well as the Cell button turning green, letting us know that there's an active selection. So that's one way you can use it, is to convert your preview into a selection. But once you have an active selection, you can also click on it, and now you get this option to convert that selection into a path or to save that selection. So I'm just going to call this my Zone 10 selection, hit save, and at this point I can deselect with Command D, and notice the selection button is turned red. So if there's a saved selection, this button will turn red, which is just letting you know that we have the ability to go and load this. So obviously I don't spell very well, but if you want to load this up, just click load a selection, and now that selection has been reloaded. So it's a great way to save selections of skies or other things you might want to work with. I can deselect it, reload at any time. These are saved as channels in the document, so they do add a little bit of space. So when you're done with them, I recommend hitting delete to clear that out. And now you see that button's no longer red. And that's just letting you know that you're not wasting any space. So clear that out when you're done. Moving down to the refine section, we have a few different options in order to refine the masks in the image. The two most common are going to be group and color, which allow you to isolate your mask to very particular parts of the image, which is group, or color, which will create a very special kind of group mask that isolates things by color. Let's take a look at that. So say, for example, in this HSL layer here, we have lights in the top left. It's the same thing we looked at a minute ago where we created a lasso selection. We're going to do that in a little bit different way now by simply hitting L for lasso, drawing our lasso after we've already created this mask, and now hit group. We're going to feather this, and just like we saw a moment ago, we have this group mask scenario where the top mask further restricts the inner mask, and so we're just basically applying that lasso after the fact, or we could just manually paint on this, or all sorts of things that we want to do. Now, if you want to understand these masks a little bit more specifically, how they're working, click Combine, and that will apply the group to the inner content. If I'll click it, see how it's just this top left and the waves are gone. If we undo it and look at the original L3 mask, we have all this other stuff here. I'm going to hit Command Z to go back forward. And now you see this at top left. So the group is going to add a group that lets you isolate certain areas of the image further. Combine will actually just bake that change in permanently and give you a single mask with all the changes. So the purpose of group is to allow you to non-destructively apply just parts of a mask, because you can always add or remove. If we step back here to this mask, we could paint more white over here, or paint more black over here, and keep changing this without ever ruining the underlying Lights 3 mask. So it's just a way of non-destructively applying a luminosity mask to particular parts of the image, whereas Combine is going to say, okay, we're done making changes. Let's now make a single mask from it, but that has a couple advantages because it makes the file smaller. It also lets you see exactly what's going on in the mask. It's kind of hard to understand with these two masks exactly what's being adjusted versus clicking Combine, and now there's no uncertainty. You see the exact total mask effect from that. Now let's go, and I'm going to undo this again back to this layer. And let's say in this case, let's go and apply a different luminosity selection that's going to hit more of this sky. So if we take a look at, say, Lights 2, it's a pretty good selection of the sky in the top right here, but it's hitting a lot of the top left, of course. We can isolate that by color, because if we look at the underlying image, this is, of course, kind of blue, and this is more yellow, and we can exploit that color difference in these areas. So let's go ahead and apply this mask. So now we're going to have Lights 2, and to further isolate by color, we can click on Color. What's going to happen here is we're going to create a new group mask, but instead of painting certain areas of the image to isolate geographically, we're going to get a mask based on color, so it will isolate by color across the entire image. I could use interactive, and that will allow me to make some very precise selections, which you can see in the specific demo for the color button. In this case, I'm going to choose to pick cyan and blue and create a mask from that, which now creates this parent mask, which we can see as based on all the blue and cyan in the image, which of course is the sky and the waves primarily. And as a parent mask applied to this is now going to helpfully isolate to the sky areas. If we combine this mask and take a look at the result, now you see we've isolated the sky in the top right without that yellow sky on the left. And we could further eliminate this stuff down below simply by drawing a lasso selection around the stuff we want. It's a pretty bad selection, but just quick and dirty. Now if we hit group, go ahead and let's feather that thing. We'll go ahead and combine it, and you can see that we've got that selection of the sky, which of course I would have done a better job selecting that corner, but it's a very quick way to start to isolate your masks. And you can see we've gone from something that selected Lights 3 across the entire image, including blue sky, yellow sky, waves, and other stuff, to now just having the blue sky. And that's where this mask refinement gets really powerful, to pick specific areas of the image through group or specific colors to really dial things in. We next have this edge option, which will allow us to refine the edge of the currently selected mask, or if there's an active selection. And when you click it, you get a few different options to pre-populate the Refine Edge tool, as well as some options for non-destructive decontaminate, or to paint in the refine edges, which allows you to just refine specific edges, not all the edges in your mask. I'm not going to go through this here. Check out the Refine Edge tutorial to learn more about this, but it's a great way to deal with some specific edge issues for cutouts and blending and other pixel-specific edge problems. Then we have the History tool, which is designed to allow us to non-destructively roll back changes in the image. See the demo for that. Then at the bottom here, we have Pre-Blend. This is all about manual exposure blending. That's a very deep subject. Make sure you check out the tutorial on how to use Pre-Blend, as well as the visualization. So each of these visualization buttons down below is going to give you some alternative way of looking at the image. Map is going to give you an 11-zone map showing you where the different pixels lie in your image. Check out the tutorial on that. We have Split, which gives you split screen luminosity masking. So I can, for example, click that here, and I'll get a side-by-side view of the mask and the image. So if I go and refine this mask, I can at the same time see what's going to happen to the layered image. Check out the tutorial on that to learn more about the split screen option. We have If, which is for when you're using the Blend If blending modes, you'll be able to visualize where Blend If is affecting your image. See the tutorials on Blend If and the Check If button to learn more about that. We have Check Selection, which allows you to visualize your selection. So for example, if I load up a Zone 10 selection, right now I see the marching ants. It's not very instructive as to what's going on in the background. check selection will allow me to see the selection as if it's a mask. I can in fact paint on this and change things. So if I load up a regular paintbrush here and start painting stuff on the image, when I click check cell again, it gets reloaded. You can see the marching ants. I've changed the underlying selection. So this is the one visualization button that is really kind of designed to allow you to make some changes. You can interactively change your selection. The check L button lets us inspect the luminosity in the image. If you go and command click on it, you can then go pick a range of tones. So for example, I might choose to explore this sky in greater detail. So I can go pick the dark part of the cloud, hit OK, the bright part of the sky, hit OK, and now I get this high contrast visualization. This is a very helpful way oftentimes of going in and using the clone stamp tool where you can get subtle little imperfections, and by looking at things in high contrast, you can much more easily make better refinements of the image. Same thing with this last option here, which is the check dust option. By clicking on that, we get some options to check for dust in smooth areas of the image. So I would probably zoom in and take a look at my sky, and I can click dust a couple times to try out different variations of this, but it's just a high contrast version of the image to help you find any dust spots. And it's a great thing to do before you start working on the image too much, because the dust spots in your pixels will create dust spots in your luminosity masks. So I would do this early on in the process. And again, check out the tutorials on this. I'm just ripping through these pretty quick to just make sure you're aware of the options. This is just meant as a high-level overview, but there are much deeper tutorials on most of these various functions. And then lastly, if you're in the CC 2015.2 or later version of the panel, at the top right here we have a bunch of options hidden in this little pop-out menu, including the ability to export content to an external file so you can keep your TIFF files smaller to view them in Lightroom, a bunch of different options for how the panel operates, and a utilities panel which gives you some options. For example, in order to optimize Photoshop, if we click that, it'll check and see if there's anything that could be better optimized in your copy of Photoshop. I recommend doing that at least when you first install Lumenzia. There's the ability to load the Lumenzia actions, see the tutorial on that, and then some things like show the panel for the extension or show the folder for the extension panel. That's a great way in order to help find the extension panel if you want to manually uninstall it or uninstall plugins, etc. So just some basic utilities, not something you'd use on a day-to-day basis, but I would definitely use the optimize Photoshop option as well as checking out the load Lumenzia actions if you want to use light and dark masks and selections in your own actions. So that's just a quick overview. Be sure to check out the written manual and the other detailed tutorials. And if you don't have the written manual in front of you, the easiest way to get to the tutorials is with the tutorials button at the bottom right of the panel. Lastly, for those of you on CS6, definitely check out the related video that is just a quick note for CS6 users on the interface. It explains to you how your version of Lumenzia is a little bit different and how to work through the tutorials in the most efficient way so you can understand when I do something in the CC panel, how it relates to your version of Lumenzia.